The Boy from Yesterday, Chapter 1, The Illusion of the Idyll. It wasn't the glow of the morning sun on the dew-soaked green hills of the prairie that Tom Flannery loved best about his early morning horseback rides with his best friend, Tom Beckins, with Tom astride Chestnut and Sam riding Blitzen, so named for the lightning-shaped white streak down his dark brown forehead. It wasn't even the grin on Sam's face as he took off and rode past Tom and Chestnut, with Blitzen racing toward some unseen goal at the top of the hill, while Sam shouted, "You awake there yet, Tom?" as he rode by. "Good morning to you, scoundrel," said Tom as he gave a light kick to Chestnut's flanks, who took off following Blitzen in a race that had no particular finish line and offered no real prize except for Tom and Sam to each defend his horsemanship against his benign rival. It wasn't even the majestic view of the green rolling prairie from the top of the hill, horses breathing heavily from the sprint, that was his favorite. No, Tom's favorite part of those rides was talking with Sam about life at the top of the hill, and the feeling that they could both see their whole lives spread out before them, with the new day reassuring them that their lives held promise. "So, are you thinking of asking her?" Sam said as he pulled Blitzen around to stand abreast of Chestnut, looking directly at Tom as if the moment of truth had arrived. Sam took off his hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve, and he was resting his forearm on the top of his saddle, looking at Tom through his deep-set eyes with a look of slight impatience, his eyebrow just a little cocked and his mouth twitching into a thin smile beneath his dark, bushy mustache. "Perhaps. I don't know," Tom sighed. "She's a beauty, that's certain, and sweet as the angels." Sam nodded. "Well, then?" Tom shrugged. "I just don't know if taking a wife yet is what I want." Sam scowled a glance in Tom's direction as he put his hat back on and adjusted it just right down near his eyes to block the bright morning sun. "What is it you want, then?" Tom looked out over the horizon where the train tracks in the distance rounded a curve out of sight, leading somewhere through the hills that Tom couldn't see, that he had never been able to, and wondered if he ever would. "I want to see what's beyond that point over there, for one," Tom said. "You know, I've never been that far out of Chesterfield, not ever. Perhaps as far as Brattleton, even then a few times with Uncle Nate to see some new farm equipment we might start to carry at the store." Sam nodded, but still scowled and gave kind of a grunt, which could mean many things, but Sam was a young man of few words. "Don't you ever wonder?" Tom asked. "About what?" Sam replied. "What's over yonder, beyond those hills, in the next towns, cities, see the world," Tom said, looking intently at Sam, not understanding why anyone wouldn't want what Tom wanted. Sam didn't really answer. "Well, you have to think about taking a wife sooner or later, Mr. Flannery," said Sam, straightening up and surveying the hills around him. "Mind you, you're not getting any younger, and next year will be your 20th, if I count right." "Well, yours as well," Tom said. "Huh," Sam replied, which could also mean 1,000 different things. "Although she is a beauty, I will say," said Tom, but he was still gazing out at the horizon, still trying to see something new every time he looked over it, like maybe if he stared at it hard enough, he'd see beyond the farthest point. But then Tom's scan of the area from high atop the hill led to his view of the cemetery. Even from this distance, he could see the plots of his parents, who died 5 years ago of yellow fever. Every time he saw the 2 white marble tombstones as if they were growing of the ground like odd plants, he felt the pang in his heart of their loss. He had only been 14, and that's how his Uncle Nate had come to live in Chesterfield, to take care of the orphan Tom and to open a general store on Main Street, which thrived as new settlers came to Chesterfield every year. Tom thought about how it was starting to feel like a long time ago. He had felt like a helpless boy when his parents died, and now his thoughts turned more like those of a young man. He got to thinking about the girl Sam spoke of, Miss Mary Shiflett, the local school teacher who had graduated from nearby Chesterfield State Teachers College just last year. She had already taken over the local schoolhouse after Mrs. Tidwell had died, the 30-year wife of James Tidwell at the neighboring farm. James was still recovering from being thrown from his horse just a few weeks ago. In a town as small as Chesterfield, everyone seemed to know about everything about everyone else, in part because that was about all there ever was to talk about. The Chesterfield Sentinel had run a story about it first, and everyone else just repeated what they heard, or added a little to it if they happened to know more about the story. Tom loved all the stories the Sentinel published about Chesterfield citizens coming and going, and wondered about all those places and what they were like. He wanted to learn all he could, whatever its source. He didn't have the chance to leave Chesterfield very often, so he would read the Sentinel stories and live vicariously through the people he heard about. His favorite stories were medical ones. Tom wanted to be a doctor, but even though Uncle Nate did fairly good business at the general store, it still wasn't enough for Tom to afford to go to medical school. His interest in medicine always inspired him when he read about a case Dr. Hurd, the local physician, treated in town, or about some new patent medicine that the general store was going to start carrying. It was often touted as a cure for all what ails you. Part of this was because Tom missed his parents. If there had only been a cure for yellow fever, his parents most likely would be alive today. But they weren't. Tom knew that, and every time he went riding with Sam up into the hills and Tom saw the view of the cemetery, that fact came right back to him anew. In Tom's expansive view high above town, he could see the boarding house where Mary Shiflett lived and occasionally see the smoke of its chimneys. He thought about her plain beauty and soft voice. He could imagine her being adored by her schoolchildren, who were too entranced with her charm, though, to fall asleep in class, as if that were allowed anyway. Tom had gotten in trouble for almost falling asleep in school once as a boy, but his teacher had none of the qualities that Mary Shiflett had: her hair, her bright smile, her shapely figure. While she couldn't afford the latest fashions, Mary always seemed to make the plainest dresses beautiful. Tom wondered what it might be like to have a future with Mary, and thought about their long walks recently around town and how they talked about what might happen in the years ahead. There had already been so many changes around Chesterfield just since the time that Tom was a boy, and it seemed lately that one could never quite fathom all one person or another heard about from New York or Kansas City or some such place. There was news of something ingenious in the newspaper every day. Tom thought a lot about sharing those times with Mary, but nice as she was, he didn't feel ready yet to be a husband and father, even though other men in town who were his and Sam's age had married several years ago and were already raising their children. Tom felt this burning desire inside of him to see what he hadn't seen, to find out what was around that train track corner, to know what life beyond Chesterfield could bring. It was a curiosity that couldn't be satisfied just from reading the Sentinel alone. Tom looked around to find Sam staring at him oddly and wondered how long he had been doing that. "Where are you, Mr. Daydreamer?" asked Sam. "You look like you're 100 years away right now." Tom jolted out of his momentary reverie. Just that. Daydreaming, I suppose." Sam squared up his shoulders and sighed, looking at the same view that Tom had taken in. "Well, I suppose up here is as good a place as any to do it, then," Sam said, taking a deep breath of the clear April air and then circling with Blitzen around the top of the hill. "I've dreamed 1,000 dreams up here, fought 1,000 battles, ruled 1,000 kingdoms, ever since we were kids. There's always such a peace up here. I can't imagine leaving them. They'll just have to bury me here someday." Tom smiled, but wasn't going to let that one go unchallenged. "Well, there's more to life than just what's around here, surely," Tom said, cautiously wondering what Sam's reaction would be to that, but Sam didn't take the bait. "I expect so," was all Sam said, still knowing that Tom would continue with something else to say. "Why, I've never even been to New York City or London or one of those. You know, I saw in the Sentinel the other day that New York City has buildings now that are 5 or 6 times the height of our barn. Just think the top of it, the very top where the weather vane is, and then add about 5 or 6 more whole barns on top of that. That's how high they rise there," Tom said, like he was giving a closing argument speech to a jury. And they don't even walk up the stairs. They all stand in a big box, and a machine lifts them up to each floor of the place. Some even work at the very top of it and never climb a stair to go up or down. 5 or 6 times as tall as your barn? No, that can't be, Sam scoffed, while still knowing that Tom was right, but it was too much fun to tease him. Why, they'd topple over at that. Whole place could be flat as one of Mama's pancakes, Sam said, just to get a rise out of Tom, turning away so that his toothy grin couldn't be seen beneath his mustache. Tom took the bait. It's true, and we got a cable from Ms. Butt's niece who went there all the way on the train from here, and she said it's got the most amazing sights. People as far as the eye can see on those streets, and the whole place is full of electric lights everywhere. Every street has got 'em. You read all that on a cable? Sam said. Well, something like that. Maybe it was something else in the Sentinel, but something I've never seen before. Now, how can I get married and settle down in Chesterfield when I've never even seen a city full of electric lights? Tom said. I suppose you're right, Professor, Sam said, not wanting to argue. But we don't have electric lights up here on this hill, or even at the house yet. Main Street's getting more, though, I'll give you that. Have you seen them? Nearly every replaced gas lamp on the street now. Bright as day up there. And the campus, a few buildings there, the theater, certainly. Well, you saw all that. But electric service is expensive, though. I don't see how they do it in New York or Main Street or the like. Railroad money, I suppose, somehow. But you can have it, sir. Paying for light when a few oil lamps will do just fine. Blitzen likes it better up here, don't you, boy? Ha! More to eat from all the grass, and it don't even light up, Sam said. Then he paused and looked at the horizon again, silently, almost like he was taking it all in for the last time. We've had our share of good times up here, Professor, I'll say. Tom looked around and nodded. I know. It's meant a lot just to be up here and ponder my thoughts. I think were it not for you and your mama, I would have had a harder time coming to terms with the passing mother and father. Land sakes, do you realize it's been 5 years this year? I always thinking about around this time hereabouts. That was March, though. Yes, sir, I do recall that. Time goes fast since then, Sam said, nodding, but not showing much expression to Tom. Mom is still not quite right after Pa passed. I'm at a loss about what to do about that. So melancholy all the time. Yeah, Uncle Nate asks about her often, Tom said. Sam said nothing. Uncle Nate has been grand in all that time for me, and Tom couldn't help himself but lose himself in a reverie moment again. He thought about how Uncle Nate had let him cry on his shoulder, and neither of them cared a whit at the time that boys at 14 were said to be too old to cry. Uncle Nate had been like a second father to Tom as well as a boss. Running the general store was no small feat in a town like Chesterfield. People relied on that store for livestock feed, clothing, cooking supplies, other farming supplies, books, newspapers, train tickets, foodstuffs, their mail, and even the occasional telephone call. Though still a small town, Chesterfield seemed to be growing more and more into a true city. The railroad seemed to bring something new to town each day. Things to buy, things to be entertained by, things to be picked up at the post office, at the store, building supplies for more and more houses, and all the merchandise that came in that were ordered in catalogs. So many more items became available in the general store that Uncle Nate said they might have to expand into the space next door or take up the whole block by the turn of the century. Tom couldn't imagine running a store that big. It was full enough already. As Tom glanced at Sam, who had pulled a ways ahead on the hill with Blitzen, he saw the breeze blow through Sam's shaggy dark hair. Sam's mustache made him look more like Sam's own father now, rather than the little boy that Tom had known since the time he was practically born. Their mothers had been expecting at almost exactly the same time, and Mrs. Beckins and Mrs. Flannery used to giggle at one another as their bellies got bigger and bigger. Their fathers had suggested they might wager on which baby was to come first, but their mothers would abide no gambling. Tom thought of how the stalwart Sam had always been there for him. In their short 19-year-old lives, they had spent too much time grieving and too much time visiting graves for either of their comfort. If I lived another 100 years, Tom said quietly, I could go without burying another person that whole time. If only there'd been a way. If only we had known somehow. I'm sure Dr. Hurd tried his best, is all, Sam said, trying to reassure Tom while not really being comforted by any of that himself. Chestnut chomped some grass below Tom's feet, and the whistle of the train pulling into the station in town could be heard a mile or so away. The train engine blew a huge smokestack that wafted across the prairie and circled around the big library tower at the head of Main Street onto the campus. "Still thinking about school, then?" Sam asked, only barely hiding his feeling that he really didn't want Tom to go away, but wanted the best for Tom and his potential career. "Medical college? Yes, if I can manage it. I sure would like to, though," Tom said. "Or perhaps study to be a chemist. At the store, we got all these preparations and such. The salesmen call on us and claim their products can do all this and all that, but I don't reckon they do that much to help. I wonder what they'll bring in next. Maybe I could research something, invent something new. If I just had more school, that is. Both being a doctor and a chemist would require that." "You would make a good on either one, I'm sure," Sam said. "You're never still, Professor. I was glad to get your head out of the book long enough to get you to come up here." Sam checked his pocket watch from his vest pocket, then looked up and turned back to Tom. "Well, this is all grand, sir, but this much is for certain. I will beat you down this hill," as Sam turned Blitzen and tick-ticked his sound to make Blitzen take off on his smart gallop down the hill. "Oh, no, you don't, Mr. President," yelled Tom as he ticked Chestnut into giving chase down the hill. Tom called Sam Mr. President as a nickname because he always used to say Sam was clever enough and popular enough in town to probably be the president one day. And Sam called Tom Professor because he swore Tom was going to one day be one with all of his reading and curiosity about new things. Sam rode off and laughed at his head start would be almost impossible for Tom to gain on. Blitzen seemed to reach impossible speed as he galloped down the long, gradual hill and across the wide prairie, as if he were trying to impress his master with his speed, and certainly to show Chestnut who, in their local kingdom of horses, was the champion of them all. Sam just laughed at Blitzen's loyal effort, although Tom was making gains fast, as Chestnut had his own pride and wasn't about to be bettered by Blitzen. "I don't know, Mr. President," yelled Tom, gaining on Sam. "I might get the first stack yet," referring to the pancakes that Sarah Beckins, Sam's mother, would have started making by now, and that always was the finale to a great early morning ride before the long day of chores began. Sarah was a gifted cook and had all the plain prettiness like Mary Shiflett, but she wasn't the same after her husband died. It seemed her only joy came from being with her son, Sam, and making sure his every need was met, even though she didn't quite understand young men anymore and wasn't sure what to do much of the time. She lived as if the memory of her lost husband was always with her, distracting her. She dwelled in another world of memories that were, and memories that were never to be made. But seeing Sam demonstrate a healthy appetite for her flapjacks, and being a second mother to Tom as well, gave Sarah a simple joy, and for now, that was good enough for her. As Tom and Chestnut gained on Sam and Blitzen, Sam turned around and grinned, shaking his head a moment and saying, "If that's the way you want it, sir, then that is the way you shall have it," and with that gave Blitzen another short kick as they approached the longest stretch of the prairie that lay between where they were and Sam's house at the end of it. Blitzen took off with a renewed vigor and continued to gain speed. He maintained a strong gallop that was sure to get him the house and barn any second, where he had his breakfast waiting too in his stall. The rhythm of the hooves along the field, kicking up small clumps of the young dewy grass, seemed like it would drum forever. Suddenly, out of nowhere, came a moment as if time stood still. Tom saw it all in slow motion as the grin and determination drained from his face, and a cold thud landed in the pit of his stomach. He saw Blitzen suddenly seize up, dig his hooves into the ground, and whinny as if spooked by some unseen ghost, and with a jerk fly his hind legs up, sending Sam up and out of his saddle, becoming airborne like an acrobat at the circus, forward at high speed, somehow flying on his back for a moment, hovering above the earth, and land in a sliding skid along the moist ground. Blitzen veered off to the left in his own world of fear and panic, but recovered and circled around back to where Sam lay on the ground. Blitzen sniffed carefully at Sam, as if it were some other horse that had done the violent deed. Tom caught up a few dozen yards to the spot where Sam had landed. He looked down at Sam, who was lying on the ground and moaning in pain, holding his hand to his right thigh. Tom saw a deep gash in Sam's right calf next to a long, thin, sharp piece of granite rock that jutted just above the dirt, tearing Sam's pant leg as he slid across it. Blood already seeped to the ground around Sam's leg. Tom had never seen a man's calf split open like that. He wasn't sure, but he thought he saw bone. A shiver went through Tom as he saw the wound, and he nearly vomited. Tom realized that Sam was hurt badly. Tom had heard about these kinds of horse injuries and knew they could be serious. He thought again of the news of James Tidwell, who by report still hadn't recovered after being thrown by his beloved mare Trudy just weeks before. Tom dismounted Chestnut in one quick move, grabbed a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to Sam's leg. "You all right, Sam?" Tom asked, although he knew the answer. "I think so," Sam lied. Tom heard voices from near the farmhouse, and several of the farmhands that Sarah had hired had seen Sam fly off Blitzen and yelled over if they needed help. "That would be fine," Tom yelled back, trying not to sound alarm in his voice with the tone of his cry. Tom wrapped Sam's wound as best he could with the handkerchief, but Sam was in pain and wasn't quite alert, as if he had hit part of his head, too. Tom looked at Sam from head to toe and couldn't see any other obvious wounds, as if the gash on his leg weren't enough. "Never you mind, Mr. President," Tom said. "We'll get you some help and get you home. No chores for you today, friend." The farmhands, who were too new for Tom to know by name yet, arrived from their run across the field, one tall and skinny and the other one shorter and stout, and immediately helped Tom to get Sam standing up, or close to it, on his feet, and they helped him hobble on one foot toward the house. Tom's handkerchief seemed to stop some of the bleeding, but it was still soaked and red. It was obvious Sam was weak and almost unconscious from pain, now only able to voice a grunt and a moan here and there as he limped along, the men on each side of him. Sarah wiped her hands on a small towel as she came through the front door and stepped out on the porch of the farmhouse to see what was happening when she heard Tom's voice. She saw the farmhands and Tom help Sam toward the door and was panicked by the time they reached it, asking them questions about what had happened, too fast for anyone to answer any one of them. The farmhands and Tom led Sam through the parlor and nearly carried him upstairs to his bedroom and laid him down on his bed. The hands left to go take care of the horses. Tom and Sarah stayed and looked at Sam lying unconscious on the bed. Sarah searched Sam from head to toe, trying to assess the damage. The smell of burning pancakes started to waft up the stairs. "Miss Beckins," Tom started to say, smelling the smoke. "Mercy!" she yelled and flew down the stairs, calling behind her. Tom, get Dr. Hurd, quick as you can." And she went downstairs to prevent the possibility of a dreaded kitchen fire. Tom looked at Sam's closed eyes and face with a combination of affection and fear. Tom bent down to Sam's ear, not knowing whether Sam had either fainted or fallen asleep. "Now, never you mind, Mr. President," Tom said. "We're going to put you back together, good as new. I swear it." Tom felt a knot in his throat as he said it. "By the stars, I swear it." A light breeze blew in the open window as he spoke and bathed Sam with a cool air and a relief from the stuffy upstairs heat. He brushed the hair from Sam's sweating forehead and noticed Sam's chest as Sam breathed heavily but steadily. There was now a solid dark patch of blood on Sam's bed where his handkerchief was still wrapped around Sam's leg. Tom realized he had no time to lose. He raced and turned down the stairs, calling to Sarah in the kitchen, "On my way, Miss Beckins," and raced out the front door, down the front porch steps and toward the direction of town. Dr. Hurd could be anywhere today, but he had to find him fast. He let Chestnut rest with Blitzen in the Beckins barn. In town, Tom would be more nimble on foot and could dart in and out of the narrow alleyways between the streets to cover more ground quickly in his search for Dr. Hurd. As he ran toward town, the sun still shone on the prairie behind him and the now empty hills where Tom and Sam had been riding just a few minutes before. It was a beautiful spring morning in a perfect American town, and while Sam laid in his bed, uncertain of his future, the prairie, the dew, the horses, and the sun were oblivious to any of his troubles. No one looking at from the outside scene would ever have suspected that anything was wrong, for it was April 20th, 1890, and all was right with the world.